Welcome to the RBR Recap. Welcome back to the RBR Recap. I'm Alex Burgos, editor-in-chief of Round by Round Boxing, and I'm joined by publicist, interpreter, and reporter Gabe Rivas. Gabe, how are you, sir?
Doing very well, my friend. Enjoying this Sunday morning with my coffee. How are you?
Yeah, I see, man, and some sunlight. I'm kind of jealous, actually. I'm looking at snow and like 20-degree weather right now, so kind of cold out here.
Perks of being in Southern California, man.
But yeah, we had a couple good fight cards this weekend, and we're going to catch up on that. The first being a top rank on ESPN card. And so that featured Robson Conceicao versus Xavier Martinez. Pretty good, like 50-50 fight going in. One that had a lot of good storylines. It was a WBC title eliminator. And in that fight, we saw, after less than 5 months removed from his close decision loss to WBC super featherweight world champion Oscar Valdez, Conceicao earned a unanimous decision victory over the previously unbeaten Martinez. Now, Martinez was making his top-ranked debut. For many of you that have followed his career, he was with Mayweather Promotions, who decided to let his contract lapse. And so this was kind of like his big moment. He was headlining on ESPN against a gold medal Olympian and a guy that had just challenged for the title. And so, as Mark Kriegel was saying on the telecast, it was kind of all set up for this young guy, undefeated, to come in and really earn the spot, get the attention of the public, and then potentially go into a title opportunity against Valdez or, Stevenson, whoever it might be. But what ended up happening was quite different. So the fight was a 10-round, like I mentioned, WBC title eliminator, and Conceicao won a one-sided unanimous decision. Scores were 100-90, 99-91, and 98-92. Gabe, what were your thoughts on this fight and kind of moving forward now, what we're going to see for each guy?
Conceicao definitely demonstrated why he's a top 130-pound fighter, utilizing the same style that he used to make a very difficult fight against Valdez, fighting from the outside. There was a moment where Martinez was able to connect him with a hook that hurt him, but otherwise it was a very dominant win. As for the division, there are a lot of fights to be made, but there are some unfinished business with some of the other belts. We have Shakur Stevenson and Oscar Valdez potentially unifying their WBO and WBC titles. And then we have Roger Gutierrez fighting against Chris Colbert to kind of quote unquote unify the WBA titles. And we also have the IBF title out there as well. So very interesting time in the 130-pound division. Would like to see Conceicao against one of these other champions in the near future. As we saw with the Valdez fight, he definitely can keep up with them. And in fact, on a good night, definitely defeat them. So it'd be interesting to see.
I thought it was a tale of two fights. Maybe through the first half, it was, give or take an even fight. And so you had Martinez coming out pretty strong in the first. I thought he won that round. Like you said, he buzzed Conceicao pretty well in the third round, won that round. So, by the fifth round, you're thinking, okay, this could go either way. And I think what Martinez maybe and his team thought was we're going to see Conceicao fade again, which happened in the Valdez fight. And it just didn't happen. He seemed to pick up his pace and he got stronger. And so he took over, from 6-10 and outlanded Martinez. And these two guys are two of the most active fighters per round in that division. And so they throw a ton of punches, but Conceicao mixed up his feints, his movement, his boxing. He did really well. And so I think at 33, like kind of I was mentioning before, Kriegel saying like people are expecting in that busy division for him to kind of be on his way out. He's had a, decorated amateur career, I think over 300 fights. I mean, he's boxed for a long time. And so we don't know, a guy at 33, even though he only has 17, 18 pro fights, he's still got a lot of mileage on him. And so, but I thought he did well. He showed that he can, still win the fights that he needs to get to that championship level. And he should be in the mix, like you said, for one of these other fights. I don't know if it's smart to wait around for the winner of, Stevenson and Valdez fight. Maybe he gets one more stay busy fight, or if he can, get the opportunity to fight. I mean, there's obviously all these political lines, but you were saying the Colbert and Gutierrez winner, something like that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it, very interesting, the other belts as well as I did. One that I forgot to mention is Kenichi Ogawa.
Yes.
He has the IBF title. You mentioned being 33 years old for Conceicao. Kenichi won his belt at 33 years old late last year on the undercard of Teofimo Lopez versus George Cambosos. So again, maybe another guy who's 33, who still has a lot of mileage, perhaps doesn't have the amateur background that Conceicao has, but definitely someone around that age that could make this division interesting along with the other fighters.
Definitely, because I mean, yeah, we have just a lot of the guys like on the cusp of, wanting to be at that position where they want to fight for a title. I think Lamont Roach Jr. is another guy who's right at that cusp, looking for a chance for the WBA title, high in the rankings and whatnot. And so, you have guys that could potentially make for interesting fights. So it remains to be seen. But mentioning Martinez a bit, I liked his performance early on. Like I said, the first half of the fight, I think he just faded. He's young. I think he's 24. So he can definitely still come back, make some noise. And I thought something that was interesting that Conceicao said is, Martinez hits harder than Valdez. He was wobbled. And I think the third round was the biggest punch that Martinez landed. But I think there were a couple other rounds too where he got Conceicao's attention, kind of buckled the legs a little bit. And it was just mystifying a little bit that he didn't follow up on those things. And even after the fight, in the post-fight interview, they're like, why couldn't you throw punches, or why couldn't you, let those hands go? And he's just like, I'm asking myself the same question. So look, if he can't answer, I definitely can't answer. But we saw that it was there for the taking, and he just, wasn't able to put it together. But would I like to see him again? Definitely. I hope Top Rank isn't done with him after just one fight. They have a lot of real estate in the 130-pound division. And so I think that there's some, good fights to be made in and around that division for him. So remains to be seen. The other fight card, though, on the night was one that kind of flew under the radar, but had a WBC title on the line, which was 34-year-old WBC cruiserweight champion Junior Makabu, who defended his title against Tabiso Mchunu. And that was a rematch. And it was in a small auditorium in Ohio. It was a Don King card, pay-per-view. Was streamed on Fight TV. So, I mean, it was definitely under the radar. The diehards were watching it. It was just a kind of a weird card, weird night of boxing. And of course, it wouldn't be a Don King fight card if there wasn't some controversy. So it was a disputed decision in the end that saw Makabu win via scores of 115, 113 twice. And then Mchunu took one of the judges' scorecards, 116 to 112. Now, of course, the big talk after the fight was Junior Makabu calling out CANELO because we saw at the beginning of the year after the WBC convention that he's potentially an opponent at cruiserweight for CANELO. And so I want to get your thoughts not only on, what's next maybe for Makabu, what's next maybe for CANELO. Is he really in the mix of potentially fighting the pound for pound king?
Late last year, it had seemed that perhaps a team of CANELO had discarded Makabu as an option because he took this fight late in January, but it's not outside the realm of possibility to be able to return in May to be able to defend that title. So we'll have to see. Some news outlets like ESPN are reporting that CANELO is currently weighing the options and that he has two offers for him, which would be one for PBC to face Jermall Charlo in the defense of his super middleweight undisputed championship. There's also a separate offer from Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing, which would be to fight light heavyweight title holder Dimitri Bivol, and then finally have the trilogy fight against Triple G. And then, so I guess you can consider him having 3 or 4 potential opponents within the next year. And I think that would be a historic run to be able to, go up to cruiserweight. Granted, it is against a flawed champion, because that's what happens when an undisputed champion like Usyk or someone else moves up in a division. The belts become vacant. People start fighting them. Perhaps it's not the greatest champion in the world who wins that title, and we're seeing that with Makabu. But as CANELO has said previously to fights against Rocky Fielding and Kovalev, not only is he about, staking his claim to be the best in his division and obviously doing great things in that regard, he also wants to accomplish some historic feats like winning a light heavyweight championship, like winning a cruiserweight championship. And so he could potentially do that against Makabu. And at the same time, he can keep this a balancing act, move up to the other divisions and win belts, and also defend his titles at his home division, which is 168 pounds, which would be that defense against Jermall Charlo. And then obviously, some of those fights against Dimitri Bivol, which would be another historic feat in a division that's a lot more closer to his home division and would perhaps be against a more legitimate champion in light heavyweight than is the case with Makabu in cruiserweight. People see Bivol as really a top fighter in that division, and so it would be a really important feat. And then obviously the potential fight against Triple G. He's a little bit older now, but I think everybody would be in agreement that it's still a lucrative fight, and perhaps we haven't seen a Canelo fight of the magnitude of the first Canelo Triple G fight. So if he could get these 4 fights within the next year, kind of like what he did following the pandemic, it would be yet another historic run. And again, with the fighter, if you keep fighting and you stay in the ring and you stay in the gym, that momentum is another element in that leads you to victories, that gives you an advantage against your opponents.
Definitely. I think you said a couple of good things there. If Canelo makes that 4-fight run, I mean, he's coming off a ridiculous 4-fight run, obviously with the Yildirim fight starting, and then, sweeping the super middleweight champions and unifying, becoming undisputed. If he's able to do this in, 4 fights with Makabu being like the comparable to Yildirim, just kicking it off and staying busy, winning that fight. It sounds kind of ridiculous moving up to cruiserweight as a stay busy, but for me, it's like, he's not this super dangerous fighter. I think Canelo conceivably should be the favorite. Obviously, he can move up, he can win that fight. It's a fight that he's allowed to take. But then to come back down and potentially, or in whatever order, fight Charlo, Bivol, Gennady Golovkin for the 3rd time. That 4-fight, group, you could argue is even better than the one that he just did in the amount of time that he just did. So, I mean, there's a lot on the table. That's history. And I'm not even talking about becoming undisputed or going to another division. That, if we look back historically and we're like, okay, well, let's look at the guys that he fought in that stretch. That's the type of stuff that moves you up historically as maybe one of the greatest of all time, which a lot of people seem to want to start talking about right now. I think it's too early, but when you look back and you're like, okay, yeah, he took these guys out in these divisions and moved up and down and do it. And it's also going to be dangerous. I mean, we saw it with, Roy Jones, who was so dominant and just started going up and down and up and down. And eventually it takes a toll on your body. And so from that aspect too, that's a challenge for him to stay active and to stay sharp by gaining or losing weight and fighting these different guys in different divisions. So it's potentially obviously a huge payday for Makabu. He keeps his name in the mix. So what that victory did for him was still keep him in those Canelo sweepstakes. And look, we've seen stranger things happen. I think it's even though they're not talking about him right now as maybe one of those 3 offers or one of the 3 guys. And look, to be honest, no boxing fan really wants to see that fight. Nobody's clamoring for that fight. But you're going to get the people that are like, okay, yeah, he's going for history. He's going up in another weight class. He's going to win a title. Fine, do that. But we want to see the other fights as well. And it's not, unconceivable that he's going to come back and be like, okay, yeah, well, I'll fight 3 months later and I'll fight Charlo. I'll fight Bivol. Like we've seen him now starting to maybe fight more of the fights that we want to see against guys, that we want to see him in the ring against. And I'm talking about Canelo.
And the Makabu could be a fun knockout, just like we saw with Kovalev. I mean, right into the 11th round, it was kind of like, all right, it's probably going to go to a decision. And suddenly, boom, fight's over. Right. So we could get a highlight reel knockout. It might not be a fight that people are clamoring for, but I think the result will be something that will be shared across social media and television.
Yeah, a little Kirkland or Kovalev action going on there. I wouldn't mind seeing one of those, definitely. So, I mean, a lot on the table for Canelo, and we'll monitor that as the weeks pass. And so we'll see. But for now, like we said, Junior Makabu retains his title and he's in the mix. And I got to shout out his, I don't know what kind of fur that was, but it looked like he's already spending his Canelo Alvarez check but decked out in some nice fur as he went to the ring last night. So there's that. We'll be back next week with some discussion on 3 fights, including Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios, Clarissa Shields versus Emma Kozin, Siri Sakis or B-Side versus Carlos Cuadras. And so for Gabe Rivas, I'm Alex Burgos. Thanks for tuning in to the RBR Recap.